Okie dokie. So this lesson is going to be a reintroduction to your controlled assessment. We're going to talk about what it actually is and what you're expected to do. So for your starter, please, can you get your folder and take everything out that is to do with electronics? Okay, so this will be stuff that maybe you've done this term, it might be stuff that you did last term before Christmas, but everyone should have something, whether it's an actual worksheet, a booklet, or even just some notes. So everything on electronics. Okay, what is a controlled assessment? This is a great question, and you're going to hear this term a lot. So we need to make sure that we fully understand what it actually means. So a controlled assessment is a coursework-based project. And this is where you create a plan for a practical task. You then conduct that practical task, and then you evaluate that practical task, normally in that order. So, bit of retrieval, guys. You have completed a controlled assessment before, and if you're sat thinking, no, I haven't, yeah, you have. Think back to way before Christmas. You had the absolute luxury of plastering part of a stud wall, and that was your controlled assessment. So that is where you made a plan of the plastering task, you completed that plastering task, and then you evaluated it. So that was a controlled assessment. So cast your minds back, and on your whiteboard, can you write out a list of what you need to consider for any practical project? So cast your mind back to that wall and plastering. What did you actually need to know before you could get started? What did you need to have with you before you could get started? And how did you know that you would be safe at all times? Have a little think and write out that list on your whiteboards. So hopefully you got one or two of these things down. For any practical project, you need to consider the tools you need, the materials you need, how long the practical task will actually take, what the practical task needs to look like at the end, and you also need to know how to be safe. This is all the stuff that you'll cover in a controlled assessment. So what else would you actually cover in a controlled assessment? So we know there's some kind of practical, but what else? So on the right hand side of the screen, you'll be able to see a table, and it tells you what a work plan might look like, practical tasks, and a report. So for your controlled assessment, you will always do the work plan first, then the practical task, and then finally you'll do a report, a summary of what went well, even better, etc. So before we can talk about this plan, first, what actually is the practical bit that you're going to be completing for your controlled assessment, the next controlled assessment? It's electronics. So whenever I start talking about electronics, or anyone starts talking to you about electronics and your controlled assessment, or just your assessment, this is what I mean, this thing here, so this board, which hopefully by now we've all started or we've all even wired it. And if you're sat there thinking, oh, holy moly, I've not finished mine yet, don't panic, we have time and we'll get that done. But this is what we're talking about whenever we talk about our controlled assessment, this board here. And for your assessment, what you're going to be asked to do is you're going to be asked to actually change these fittings here. So just the fittings. You're not going to be asked to change the wires, the terminals, the fuses, nothing like that. You're just going to be asked to change those fittings and just to assess that the actual wires are safe to use. They're intact. They don't actually need replacing. So let's go back to this diagram then. What do I mean by a work plan, this bad boy here? Now, all of this stuff is the stuff that you'd actually complete in your booklet. And if you were here with us last lesson, you would have seen this booklet. You would have been reminded of the fact that you were given one, again, way before Christmas. And what we'll do now is we'll go through each of these areas, or the areas that are the most relevant to us. Starting with interpreting technical sources of information. So before I keep verbal vomiting about what this actually is and what it means, what technical information or technical words can you remember about electronics? So again, cast your mind back. all the way to before Christmas when we first started talking about electronics, or heck, you can even cast it all the way back to year 10 when you did a little bit of wiring with some plugs way back when. What key terms or buzzwords can you remember? Okay, so you may have shared some of those keywords and those buzzwords. If you haven't, don't panic, because you're going to have an opportunity to share them in a moment in the form of another activity. But I just wanted to remind you or show you that interpret technical sources of information literally means using some of those key terms, that key technical terminology, which you would have looked at way back when, before Christmas, or even now. And there should be a page in your booklet that you completed, and it should look like what you can see on your screen here. So you've got your lovely image of a plug, and in order to interpret that technical information, you're just asked to identify or to label what each wire is, what those little gold thingies is, what the tube is, etc. So it's just showing that you've literally got that technical terminology, that technical understanding of electronics. And this was the first page that you were asked to complete within your booklet. Second one, nice and easy, because this is what we've been working on most recently. Plan a sequence of work, including health and safety. So this is what you may have made notes on last lesson. It literally just means to write a step-by-step instruction of how to replace those fittings. And you can write those information in regards to actually replacing the fittings on that board. You can say it's actually on a wall. It really doesn't matter. But the thing you really have to be mindful of is you need to include any health and safety considerations, including when you turn the main power off. And that's what this lovely little switch is here that's been added to every board. You will literally be asked, or you'll have to turn it from on to off just to prove that you know that that's what you need to do. So if you were working in someone's home, or you actually go into as an electrician, maybe an apprenticeship years and years into the future, you would know that the first thing you need to do when working on any electronics is you need to turn off the power to the home first off, and that's called the mains power switch. You may have also by now, or maybe before Christmas, you would have completed this page in your booklet as well. And all that is identifying the resources and tools required for your electronic practical. And that would have literally just been creating a list of all those tools that you needed. So I.E. insulated screwdriver, which is what this is here. You may have mentioned pliers, or a voltmeter, or a stud finder, whatever you think you would have needed in order to change those fittings. Right, holy moly, that's a lot of information. Now let's get back to that key technical terminology. So hopefully you've remembered a few things. Now we're going to put our knowledge to practice in the form of a very quick quiz. There's only about, I think, 7 questions. So I'm going to read out a question. If the video could then be paused, you're going to get some time to actually write out your answer on a whiteboard and a pen if you've got one available. And if you don't, just a scrap bit of paper and a pen is absolutely fine. Question number 1. What is this wire called? And there's a red arrow and it's pointing to what looks like a green and maybe a yellow wire. Green and yellow wire. What is this wire called? Absolutely spot on. It's called the earth wire. The earth wire. Next one. What is this thing called? This little gold thing with it looks like it's got the head of a bolt maybe on the top. I'm not too sure. It is either called A, a fuse, B, a terminal, or C, a conductor. The answer is, of course, B, a terminal, and that is where you connect your wires to an actual circuit, an actual electronic circuit. That's what helps to run the power. What is this wire called? And again, it's a red arrow pointing to a blue wire. What's it called? It's called a neutral wire. Well done if you got that right. Fantastic. Next one. Why is this screwdriver safer for electrical work. Interesting. For this one, I'd expect a short sentence to be written on your whiteboards. So, I don't have any answers to pop up, but you may have had an answer such as it's an insulated screwdriver. So what that means, it has a metal end or a metal tip, and that's where you'd obviously use to tighten or loosen your screws, your bolts, etc. But then the remainder of it is all polymer. It's all plastic. And plastic doesn't conduct electricity, it actually insulates electricity. So this is actually far safer for electrical work because it helps to mitigate or reduce the likelihood of receiving an electric shock from a live circuit, which you shouldn't do anyway, because everybody knows that when working with electronics, the mains power needs to be off. Oh, I did write that down. Fancy that. It is an insulated screwdriver. It doesn't conduct electricity. I will also accept that as an answer. Next one. What is this wire called? And this time the arrow is pointing to a brown wire. A brown wire. What is it called? Glorious! It's called a live wire. Brilliant. That's the shocky one. That's the nasty one. Well, they're all nasty, but that's really nastier than most. Ooh, what does this symbol mean? Oh, interesting. Have a little think. Write it on your whiteboards. Yay, it means the earth wire symbol. Well done if you got that. Oh, next one. This is a fun one. What does a fuse actually do? And just to be cruel, I'm not even going to tell you what a fuse is on this diagram. I'm going to see if you can remember or if you can work it out. Okie dokie. A fuse stops an electrical circuit if the voltage is too high. And in case you're sat there thinking, oh, what is she on about now? The fuse is this thing here. This thing here. All right. And within this small little cylinder, there is a very thin silver strip of material. And basically, if the voltage running through that material gets too high, it will just burn it out. It will cut it. It will cut it in half. It'll melt it. And that stops the electrical current from actually flowing, which is why it's used for health and safety. Finally, before working with electronics, what should you always do first? Now, this should be a very, very quick one. That the mains power is turned off. That's the very first thing you should always do. Make sure the mains power is turned off. Holy moly, Batman. Task. Right then. What I'm going to ask you to do now, as a bit of health and safety practice, a bit of retrieval, I need you to identify and describe the electrical hazards in the images below. So there's 3 images. I've got A, whoops, and I've got B, whoops, and I've got C. There we go. So what are the electrical hazards and can you describe them? So this is a little bit of exam practice, but also great retrieval for working with electronics. Okie dokie. Now that we've recapped a lot in regards to our controlled assessment, now we know what it actually means. This is what I'm going to ask you to do. At some point in a future lesson, you will be actually completing the controlled assessment task. And all that means, Year 11, I cannot stress this, all this means is you will take the notes that you have prepared on maybe planning a sequence of work or on risk assessments, whatever you've done most recently, you will take those notes and you'll write them up into your assessment booklet. That is all that means. So although the term controlled assessment can sound really quite daunting and really quite scary, all it means is you're taking your notes and you're writing them up into a formal document, and you're given plenty of time to do so. The only difference is we ask it to be done in controlled assessment conditions, and that's exam conditions. So it just needs to be done in silence. So hopefully this lesson has been really clarifying for you. Now you have a much better understanding of what the term controlled assessment means. You have a much better understanding of what you've done and what you're going to go on to do. So for the remainder of your time, I'd like you to complete your notes on either planning a sequence of work, so that writing that step-by-step instruction, including any health and safety considerations, or you can start making notes for the risk assessment for your practical. So we always write our risk assessments because this tells us how to be safe for any practical task. And a risk assessment, if in case you can't remember, but you've done so many of these, a risk assessment is where you identify the hazard of a practical task, you identify the risk of that hazard, and then you state a control measure to help to mitigate, reduce or remove that risk or from actually happening. So the risk assessment that you have to write is based on the fact that you will be working with live electric. So that's why we keep saying you must always turn the mains power supply off. Okay, so there's some textbooks in the room to help you. You've also got your electronics information pack, which should also be in your folders. If you don't have those, there should be some spare copies at the front of the room as well. But just spend the rest of your lesson time writing up those notes. Again, I really hope that was clear for you and that there was plenty of clarity. And I apologise for the background noise. That sounds like there's just a load of mice tap dancing. It's just my dog on my dining room floor playing with his squeaky toy because he saw this as an absolute good opportunity to be inconvenient.